attorneys, our outside bond counsel who've assisted us with this with respect to what kinds of funds can be used to make the advance. Clearly, something like the sewer fund, a special fund that's not general fund funded, would qualify. But they've also given us counsel that general fund monies and perhaps even the claims fund would be possible to use. Those aren't something we want to use, but to the extent that there is another money available, we feel that creating the opportunity to do this, as long as we document this in the council findings, would be in the best interest of the city.
Let me just go back on what my concerns are. If it's a legitimate expenditure, say of the sewer fund, what we want to do is use that for its intended purposes and not go back one day and say we need cash and do a judgment bond and then pay it all back at a later date just because we're recouping cash. What we do not want to occur either is we just bundle a bunch of settlements and say, let's just do 12 of these together. It's not a Mayday. These are regular settlements that would go through the 970 account or whatever, that we not then get in the practice of bundling a bunch of those and saying we can create cash by making this go into this other means of generating cash.
Well, certainly the city's more likely to borrow to pay settlements if it has less cash in general. And the council has control over identifying and determining which cases you want to finance out of judgment obligation bonds. I suspect that there will be some bundling because the size, judgment bond transactions only work at a certain size. So, for example, the Mayday cases are, $12.6 million, so that's not big enough for a deal by itself. And so we're going to have to do a little bit of coordinating.
Yeah, I mean, but what I don't want to do is that we have money that's set aside legitimately to pay litigation.
Right.
We just do it for convenience.
No, I think that the council findings really have to go to the fact that overall there isn't enough cash in the 9770 account to pay what settlements and judgments are coming down the line.
Natalie Wilcieo. I agree with Marilyn. I think that the only way that we can issue a jail bond in general, my understanding from a layperson's point of view, is that if the city hadn't contemplated it. That's one of the issues that we discussed with bond counsel. So a lot of the information that you receive about what the attorneys are thinking of paying from the litigation account wouldn't be eligible because they already were considered by the attorneys. We're talking about extraordinary things that come up, things that we didn't plan for, or things that are just so large that the litigation account wouldn't be able to pay for it.
See, I agree, that's the intent. But we don't want language that's so loose that one day in a fit of we need cash, that we create another dynamic to where we're using our credit card when we should be using the money that's dedicated.
Well, I don't think the attorneys or the city staff will feel comfortable recommending a finding that there's no money available to pay this, except for financing, unless there truly is
but I think
no money.
I know the no money issue is one, but we also, with the refunding, you could have already spent the refunding and said, let's go bundle those in recoup funds.
Well, hopefully we'll have a plan. This won't happen. I mean, I think the issue right now is not having the money to even make the advance.
See, the thing I'm concerned about is the fact that you're sitting here and you understand it. A year, 2, 3 years, somebody that may not understand it as well may use it as a vehicle to recoup funds when that wasn't the intent. It was to be an emergency method of funding something that you had no funds for, not creating a revenue source through another means. That's what we're concerned about.
Well, I think we've had a lot of discussions with the attorneys, and I don't think they would make the finding unless it really was necessary.
Let me ask, did we get a sign-off from the CLA on this language?
Lynn is who we've been working with.
Yeah, I think the latest emails have been with Lynn Ozawa.
Speaking of Lynn, she just walked in. Did you see the final draft?
I did not see the final draft, although we were included in the emails going back and forth between your office.
Okay.
The final issues that Lynn and Natalie and I discussed via email included the changes.
And this is something that we have to move pretty quickly because what is it? You got a timeline?
There's a 31-day, you said?
This ordinance will not become effective until 30 days after it's published, which is after council approval and mayor signature. So we've got some lead time here we need.
We're trying to get it to council before recess?
Hopefully, but as long as we make progress, I think it'll be fine. This also relates to agenda items 1 and 2 that are going into closed session as to coordinating timing and things. So I don't mind talking about it, except it will be specifically discussed in closed session.
Okay.
Yes, this includes the concerns that we have, and we're in agreement with this.
Okay. Well, let's do it again for timing. You saying we do not have to rush it this week?
I
Well,
would like to see it go on.
yeah, well-
That's what I need to find out.
Well,
I think from a funding point of view, I think CAO's office would feel a lot more comfortable if the 31 days began before you went
Okay.
on your
That's what we need to
recess.
know. You need to move it this week.
yes, I just didn't know if it would be at all possible, but if it's possible, then
Is it possible?
It's,
Your office will have to request a special meeting.
Well, there's only 10 members, so we can't. And we've already,
An ordinance.
yeah, so. that's
well, we
all
can only do, yeah, I mean, we can only do what's possible in terms of the council attendance, so.
I think the CAO's concern is that as you move forward with some extraordinary settlements or judgments, that you as the council mayor have flexibility in making decisions as to funding and how you will fund these. So I think that with the changes that we made over the last week with Lynn, and obviously Marilyn did them, that flexibility is built in.
Okay. So the issues, we have a sign off, our bond council people are satisfied, CAO, CLA, and the city attorney's office are all satisfied. The key is the timing as to, if we only have 10 members, then it wouldn't appear that
Well,
serves the purpose to rush it to council.
the language here permits, if it eventually gets adopted, permits settlements to qualify for financing even prior to the effectiveness of the ordinance, as long as the findings that are required by this are in the approval, council approval. So, if the council ends up approving a settlement that it wants financing for, this is effective, that will be fine, and that's been signed off by the bond council.
But the issue then is, how does the council aware that we have that little agreement that you can put a settlement into this plan before this plan's approved?
Well, that could be in the CLA and CAO report, and in fact, it will, as you required, the language says that it can only be settled and financed if the CLA and the CAO recommend that. So I think that the council will be fully informed. If in fact you want to send this to council and get 10 votes for a first reading, at least they're on notice of what this is, even if it's not effective with a 12-vote approval. So it might be
Two tens or one?
yeah, right. So it might be best under the circumstances to go forward this week with an approval, even if it's not with the
Right,
12
that's-
votes.
Yeah, why don't we try that?
Yeah,
If
I
not,
think-
then it's September.
Yeah, that's our concern, that you just have flexibility as you move into these settlements.
And the city clerk can reflect what the city attorney just stated as being the safeguard in the committee report.
Okay. All right, so we will move this, we'll make an attempt to get it this week.
Thank you.
And if there's any adjustment of language, let us know before it gets to council. Okay. Thank you, we'll move that.
The next item on the agenda, item 5, CAO CLA reports relative to the public-private partnership proposal for parking garages and meters.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sarai Bago with the CAO's office. The working group on the parking P3 project is here to provide you status with the project.
Okay.
prior to our last presentation at committee on June 15th, our parking consultant, Desmond, had already completed nearly all of the field work necessary to collect the data on the meters and the structures. After our committee meeting on the 15th, we directed Desmond to focus their efforts on analyzing the structure data. However, in their final report, they will be addressing some information that's provided regarding the meters.
Today, we're not attempting to approve their final report. We're just talking about adding some funds to finish two pieces of it. Is that correct?
Right. In the report, I explained that we have expenditures currently at $394,000, and we estimate future expenditures of about $176,000 to complete the study and to complete the valuations of the garages.
And that would bring up the total of what?
That's $70,000 more than the $500,000 we have appropriated.
How much?
$70,000 more than the $500,000 we already have.
Okay, wasn't there another piece that we talked about having a guide or a manual?
If the council and the mayor decide that they would like to have an operations and maintenance manual prepared by Desmond, then we will need additional funding for that in the
And that's on material they've already researched.
Right.
They just would put it compiled in a manual for our employees to look at as it relates to management of the 11 parking lot, or all parking lots.
It would include addressing the capital expenditure needs for the garages and what would be needed to basically maintain them at optimal levels.
Okay. So the total amount from we would up it, what, 130,000?
Yes.
And that's total? We have no lingering bills or anything like that?
Not
So that
to my
we-
knowledge.
Okay. So I mean, so if we do this, we're not coming back and saying we need to go to 650 or 700, or we're talking this is the final allocation for these two specific issues.
This would be to complete the parking study, to have our financial advisor complete the valuations on the garages, and then if you desire, then we would have the operations and maintenance manual prepared by Desmond.
But now the funding is already there to complete the study, right? That's within the 500,000.
It is, but we have had additional charges by the financial advisor, and she's helping us prepare the valuations.
Okay.
The financial advisor, Mr. Chairman, took on a slightly different role when we decided to bring it to an advisor whose sole purpose was to provide us an analysis with no vested interest on the outcome of the transaction. So when she did that, she took on a more active role, which increased the billing slightly, which is why the request to complete a study just of the parking structures. The study, the analysis is nearly complete. It's simply the valuation portion to give you an idea of what this is worth for the parking structures. And that will take the $70,000.
Okay, I understand the 70 and the 60. I just want to be assured we have no other bills that takes us beyond the 500.
This is the first phase of the project. So for the first phase of the project, this is completion. If you make the decision to move forward with the parking structures, there will be additional costs that independent appraisers and financial analysts will have to do for us.
If you go into the P3. But
Correct.
The 500 pays for what we asked for, an analysis.
Yes.
And gives us some idea of how we can run them better. And then it completes it and gives us the manual.
Yes.
But again, if we make the decision to move forward, then we all have an expectation it's more money.
Correct.
But if we capture what we have today, we just don't want any lingering bills that goes beyond the 130 you're asking for today.
Correct.
We don't have any lingering bills. Everything that we've received to date has been paid, and it's through the end of July.
We've made that clear to the consultants.
Would we, even if we decide not to go forward with the P3 deal, would we use the maintenance manual for anything?
We believe it would be valuable for Department of Transportation to use as a guide for how they make decisions and how they operate and maintain the structures.
Okay, so we would still use the maintenance manual even if we decide not to go forward with the P3
Yes.
deal? So it's an investment worth making. We could use that money. Now, are you saying that this costs, this includes an analysis of both the structures and the meters? No, this is just the structures at this time.
This is a completion of the structure deal, the value of the structures, and since the analysis was ongoing when the last committee meeting took place, the consultant had already completed the data collection and has compiled that in the report, so there's some valuable information on the meters, but the valuation of the parking meters is not included.
So at this time, we are not analyzing whether a meter deal makes sense for the city or not. Are we doing a cost-benefit analysis of the, we're not moving forward with that. Okay. Last time we were here, we were asked for 500,000 in addition to the 500,000 we had originally approved. These, what is this, $60,000 and $70,000, are these part of that additional $500,000?
It is. When we originally came for the
The second 500,000
500,000,
you were
that
asking.
was including additional analysis on the meter side.
Okay, so this 130,000 here would have been part of the $500,000 that you asked for last time, but we did not approve.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And again, I think the committee was very clear last time. We didn't feel comfortable moving forward with the additional $500,000. And to reiterate what the chairman of this committee has asked, there will be no other additional invoices or costs associated with studying the proposal for the council to make a decision whether it wants to move forward or not.
That is correct.
No other
What
costs.
will be presented to you is a valuation of the parking structures specifically with some data on the meters, but not an analysis of the meters. So you will have all the information, we believe you will have adequate information to determine of the 10 structures what the consultant anticipates to be the potential added value of each. You will see in the report specific opportunities for each one of the 10 structures and a total of the valuation. So we'll get a dollar figure, or at least a range of dollar figures, what we would anticipate a P3 deal for the parking structures could generate.
Okay, thank you.
And then, let me ask one other question. On the information that they tallied on meters that they have available, is there some way to ensure that that material gets to DOT as they're developing the RFPs for meters? Is that going to be available to them?
Yes. We are communicating with DOT as we go through this process.
All right, thank you.
Also, if I could just make a technical correction to recommendation number 1, and I'll provide the language, is to delete the phrase "to the reserve fund and appropriate therefrom." And also just to point out that this recommendation transfers 70,000, not the 130,000. So the decision is, if you would like to transfer the funds for the manual, then we need to change this recommendation to
Okay.
130.
What I'd like to recommend, because I think both of them are beneficial for what we're studying, is that we do both of them and get all the information available that they've studied before you go to another step. But it would also enhance our ability to determine exactly, if we wish our own employees to continue moving forward, what are the things available that they can do to enhance the operation of the structures. So you have the right wording to do both?
So I will work with the clerk to make sure she has the correct
Okay.
language.
Okay, and then how do we ensure that the meter information is formally transmitted to LADOT prior to them going forward on the RFPs?
The CAO's office will transmit the final parking study to,
Okay, so they're aware so that we're not at cross purposes on that?
they are aware.
Okay, all right. So then we will have the language available. We'll approve the 2 items, the 60,000 and the 70,000 items, and the wording from the CAO's office will go to the clerk. And we then, just as an added direction, ask the CAO to ensure that the material collected and evaluated regarding meters is directed to the LADOT prior to them going out for RFP. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and let me ask one other thing. When will all of this come back to us? Once this action is done, when can we expect all of these reports finalized?
We're expecting the parking study to be final by the end of August approximately, and then the valuations also completed around that time, beginning of September, by our financial advisor, and then the group will work together to put a staff report that we will present to council.
So when that comes forward, all of those should be reviewed at the same time?
Yes.
Okay. So we should have all of them by the end of
by
September?
the end of September.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 6 on the agenda is a Board of Review report relative to a request to write off delinquent accounts receivable of $1,000 and over per account.
Good afternoon. I just had one quick question on this, and you may have to update us a little bit. I thought when we had these items come before us before, that when we ran into a situation that was out of statute, or that we felt we'd exhausted even our vendors, that we had vendors that would take this debt, pennies on the dollar, and continue to work on them, as opposed to just saying we waive them or that we forgive them.
I think that was something that was mentioned, but whether it was pursued or not, I don't know, but Jeffrey Whitmore from
Okay.
Finance can answer that.
Because I thought we had a firm on board that basically said, send us, as a last resort, everything that you could not complete, and we'd be glad to continue researching it.
Two things, Mr. Parks. We do have one process in place to actually sell the delinquent debt. And after addressing a number of issues, some expressed by city attorney, we've concluded that, and literally within the next few days, we'll be concluding that deal. But in terms of additional vendors that would pursue, we're in the process also of exploring a secondary collection effort. And we're in the process of evaluating that RFP, and we do expect that to go forward in the relative near future.
On the one you said you're working with the city attorney, what would that vendor provide us?
Well, the sale, it would be an actual relinquishment of those debts.
Okay, and they're on board now?
They will be within the next few days.
Okay, would this type of debt be the type of things that they would take over?
They would evaluate the portfolio. They take a look and see if they'd have any interest. They do have the ability to make an offer if they think it is worthwhile.
All right. Can we just hold this and allow them, if they're on board in 3 days or 4 days, to let them look at this and make that assessment before we make a decision?
Us writing this off still would need to occur before the actual sale.
So the write-off has to precede that?
Correct.
Okay. Then what we need is some wording so that we can cut down the questions when it gets to council, is to give the proper wording to the clerk that we, first step, have to basically go through this process, but the intent is to take these debts back and basically go through this last resort vendor so that it's clear that there's other processes in place.
We can provide that language for her.
Okay. Okay, we'll move with that amendment.
Thank you. Item number 7 on the agenda, CAO report relative to selection of the city's general financial advisors.
Good afternoon. Hatos, CAO office. This report is the selection of the city's general financial advisor. The CAO recommends Public Resources Advisory Group and KNN Public Finance to serve as the city's general co-financial advisors. The CAO also requests authority to negotiate and execute a contract in the amount not to exceed $165,000 per year. Also, $100,000 per year for general advisory services related to special funds programs. The CAO office released an RFP in September 2008 to 39 firms. Of the 39 firms, 12 firms responded. As you can see in attachment 2, we have a little chart. Of the 12 firms, 6 firms were MBE, WBE, and 5 firms were LBE, Local Business Enterprises. Of the 12 firms, we shortlisted 6 firms and interviewed the firms. Of the 6 firms, Public Resources Advisory Group and KNN Public Finance ranked the top 2.
Let me just ask, on these firms, one of the things that appears we weigh heavily is their experience, and one of these firms, I think, has been with us for quite a while. Does that put them in a position of continue to be selected because they have so much experience with the city, where we're not looking at other firms that might certainly be competing, but will never get in that slot if we use one firm over and over?
Yes, experience was a factor.
Is that experience in general, or experience just with the city?
It's with the city and in general, it's a combination.
Okay. Let me ask, what is the issue?
I think I want to answer that question a little bit more thoroughly,
All right.
if you don't mind. All these 6 firms have all been general financial advisors.
You know, what now?
Have all been general
Yeah,
financial
okay.
advisors.
For the city, or?
All over California.
Okay.
And all of them have worked with us before. It's not one of those 6 firms that we interviewed that we have not worked with. So when we looked at the experience, we looked at overall experience, not just experience with the city. Because obviously it's not fair to just look at city experience. And also the interview. The interview was their chance really to come in and to look at the firms. And to look at, for us to look at them as firms. And for others who have not participated in the city. I've got somebody from the county participate on the panel, DWP, Airport participate on the panel. So they got a chance to also look at these firms and give their opinion about what they thought.
Okay, let me ask, on the issue of, and we've gone through this when we set up the bench for underwriters, I'm assuming that although on the top 6, all of them have offices in LA, even though they're in other states, or some of them are in other states?
Yes, even though they're headquartered
Or the city.
that's not in LA, they do have a office in LA.
Okay, and then let me ask you, is there a downside, being that we only pay them as we use them? Is there a downside in the sense of all 6 of them being considered as it relates to financial advice? Do they have individual expertise that can be drawn on, or how does that work?
We currently have a financial advisor list that most of these firms are on, that we can use them for special projects.
Okay, but now then, what is this list? How does it distinguish from those others?
This list is for our general financial advisor, for general work such as our debt ratings, to maintain our debt database. It's just more general, it's not specific to like a...
So we use some of these firms for very specific types of underwriting or advice, but this is for more of a general...
General overall city.
Okay, then my question is then, what would be the harm if all of them were available and you called on them for a need? Is there a limit as far as managing them, or being that there's only a certain amount of money we use and we use it when we call upon them? What would be the limitation of having more than 2?
I think it's more difficult to have more than 2. And the reason is because these are the firms that help us with more citywide issues versus transactional issues. Having a list kind of dilutes, I think, their effectiveness, because then they don't really know everything that we're working on. The 2 firms that we choose a general financial advisor are more involved with us on a day-to-day basis, whereas the other list that we have is project-specific or bond-specific. But when we need overall assistance with, what's going on in other cities, or what's going on in Washington or Sacramento, these are the 2 firms that we would turn to ask for more general assistance. So having 2 firms is definitely better than having to spread that around.
And basically, they only work on issues we give them. They're not surveying the world and coming to us and saying, here are issues that we'd like to bring to your attention. So you give them
They do a little bit of both. If they see something out there that we should be aware of, such as one of our banks has been downgraded, I mean, that's what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be helping us manage our project because they have a closer relationship with the market than we do. They have more of the tools than we do in order to do that.
Let me just tell you what my concern is in looking at the list. We have 1 firm out of, well, I guess 2 firms out of 12 that are headquartered in Los Angeles, And as we've talked before on particularly the underwriting, was a great, at least from my perspective, a great emphasis on looking at a way to ensure that firms headquartered in LA got some kind of activity. I know that in looking at some of these firms, I recognize they have activities in certain areas, but I just am concerned that in the top 6, we only have one headquartered in LA, but they're not in the top 2. And the issue of paying business tax, and as we said before, headquartered organizations have a tendency to be more philanthropic around where they're headquartered, and I'm just concerned that we'd ignore the only one in the top 6.
The first firm that was ranked number 1 has, yes, they began in New York, but their West Coast office is here in Los Angeles, and they are very active in the community. They do have philanthropic organizations that they support, and they are very active within the city. And they do, each of these 6 firms does pay business tax in the city of Los Angeles, and all 6 firms have the required, I don't know, certificate that you need to be able to do business here. All of them, the top 2 firms do have other branches, especially K&N Public Finance. They actually have an office in downtown Little Tokyo. They're affiliated with the bank here in Los Angeles. So all of them do have roots here in Los Angeles. The only firm that does not is Scott Ballas Strategies, and you've met Lois. She's definitely a Chicago firm, although recently they did get a contract with an agency in San Francisco, so they are opening a California firm.
They're the ones doing our
P3.
P3.
And they did extremely well in the interview, but we understand that distance is going to be a problem with them. And that was a consideration of the entire panel. I don't want to mislead you in saying that.
What does the LEB stand for?
Excuse me?
The LEB on the chart.
Is
Local business firm, enterprise. I mean.
According to the city attorney, anybody that does pay business, have an office here in LA qualifies as a local business enterprise. And the 3 firms listed actually have a physical office here in Los Angeles.
The 3 of the 6 have are local business.
It doesn't mean they don't pay taxes here. Is it?
No, I know they pay business if they just do business with the city.
Correct.
Now, when you started this process, did you have as a goal the selection of 2 firms, or did you say, we'll see how this turns out and we may round it out to different firms, different number of firms? When you started the process. When you started the process, you said, we're going to come down to 2, we're looking for 2 firms.
When we started the process, we started with 2. We had discussions whether 2 or 3, but at the end we decided 2 would be better.
Yeah, and for the reasons stated earlier. And I see here that the 2 firms that are selected, they're considered local businesses, but we don't have any minority-owned businesses selected or women-owned businesses selected. And typically, just for advice for the future, I think if we open up the pool, we will capture more of those minority and women-owned businesses in the future. So I'm not sure what went into the thinking here, but when we do these types of processes in the future, I'm sure if we expand the pool a bit better, we have a better shot after we look at merit and qualifications. We have a better chance of capturing those other stated goals of the city, which is to give more business to minority and women-owned businesses. I think under the MBE standards, we're not violating 209, correct? With the standards we use. So those are stated goals of the city, and one way to achieve that is to expand the pool of selected bench firms in the future. So.
On our other list, we did do that. We reached out, and that's how we got Scott Ballas on the list as a woman-owned and minority-owned. I'm sorry, as a woman-owned. The other firms on our other list, we had 2 other women-owned firms that we are using. Some of them didn't apply, and the reason they didn't apply is because they don't have general FA experience or they didn't have an office in LA.
And this is a perfect example, in my view,
Yeah.
how we continue to not give opportunities to minority and women-owned businesses. You continue to use as a criteria experience, and you get very small pool at the top. You're selecting 2. Those are going to be the largest, weight for experience, and obviously it's the traditional people who haven't been women in minority-owned businesses.
No, and we agree with you. I think I phrased that a little bit incorrectly. They didn't apply. The only one that applied that was really a woman-owned firm here was Scott Ballas. The other ones, I'm sorry, and that's not true. Acacia is also a woman-owned firm. Those are the two women-owned firms that applied. And one of them scored extremely well.
Well, Scott Ballas and Gardner Underwood are the number 3 and 4 listed, so we would have just expanded the pool a little bit. We would have captured and achieved one of the goals of the city, which is to give more opportunities to women and minority businesses. So just something for the future to consider.
Okay, thank you.
You know, one of the things, and again, I know we've gone through a process, but the more you look at that, 6 of the 12 are women or minority-owned businesses, and they're out of the running. And 5 of the 12 are local businesses, and 3 of them are out of the running, and 2 that are headquartered in LA are not in the running. And so I'm just concerned that we have not, I mean, and I don't know what the magic number of 2 is, but we've not, I think, extended this to where it's consistent the way we've looked at the underwriting pool and the more structured advisors or underwriters that we've created over the last couple of years. Let me ask if we could, did this go through ad hoc bonds?
No.
Okay. In fact, I don't know if is there going to be an ad hoc bonds? Do we know? After is it? Yeah. Let me ask you this, and I know it's that the contract is running out, but we're going to, because we don't have, I don't think this is scheduled for council this week, is it? Not.
Oh, no.
Is it?
It is scheduled for Wednesday.
For Wednesday. I just am not comfortable moving this without more consideration for local companies, and also the fact that all of the goals that we've set up for the city seem to go under the line as far as the top 2.
I think that when you look at all these firms, we're more than happy to provide you supplemental information on all of their qualifications, but I think that the pool that we have for financial advisors is very varied. We have women-owned firms, minority-owned firms, firms that are headquartered in the city of Los Angeles, and it's extremely varied. I think that the reason the city administrative officer chooses or recommends, and you choose, 2 firms, is we want you to get the best advice that you can when you come up with different projects. I'm not saying that not all these firms are qualified. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when the interview panel sat down, and the interview panel was a very broad-based, there were women and minorities on this panel, there were people who have done business in this area and who knew some firms and didn't know some firms. When they sat down and they independently evaluated the proposals and the interviews, this was the ranking. The CEO's office stepped back and said to the 3 other people who were on the panel, what do you think first? What is your opinion? How would you rank these? And they gave us the ranking based on what they saw both in the proposals and in the interviews, taking into consideration that they also have the same goals that the city does. And these were the firms that were the top 2. It doesn't mean that if the city council doesn't want to choose the top 2, you don't have to choose the top 2. This is just our recommendation. You can recommend us to choose someone else if you feel more comfortable. We're just telling you from the staff level, from the interview process that we went through, that this is who this interview panel came up with. It doesn't mean that you have to accept our recommendation.
Now, you stated some reasons why you would like to have 2 firms selected.
Correct.
Now, we balance that with the need to have more diversity
Correct.
and on this panel.
Mm-hmm.
We really be giving up a lot if we expand the 2 firms to say 3 or 4 firms? Because the next ones up the list are both, are either minority or women-owned firms. Would that be
No.
so much against the reasons why you would only want 2 firms?
It would a bit, but if you say to our office, work with these 4 firms, obviously, we would work with these 4 firms. I think that, the CAO's office is recommending that we have 2, but if you feel you want to have 4, that's your prerogative as decision makers.
And again, why 2 firms as opposed to 3, 4, 5 firms?
Because this is our general financial advisor. These are the ones that don't view every transaction or every special project. They view the city globally. So they handle our debt profile. They help us with the rating agencies. They are more what's going on all over the city versus very specific projects and issues that we may request from them. As Haas said, one of them helps us track independently our debt portfolio. One of them, deals with keeps us posted on the banks and how they're doing. They let us know how our debt is doing on the outside. They deal with issues more day to day. So we'll talk to the general financial advisors on maybe 3 to 4 times a week, depending on, well, especially now with the state, we talk to them more often. The more you have, that means that there are more firms doing basically the same thing for the city. All of them would be tracking, the debt. All of them would be helping us with the municipal market. So you basically will be paying, I think we'd structure it so it won't work out that way, but you could possibly be paying for the same work to be duplicated.
But they may have a different perspective, though.
They could, yes, absolutely. And that's why when we have special projects, we tend to go to firms that are more specialized in that area. And we tried to do that from the other list of, I think there's 13 or 14 on that other list. We've tried to, use some of those firms too. And so when we were interviewing these top 6, they were able to list some of the special projects they had done for the city. And that was important too. I mean, we did give them enough projects so they could say, hey, we do know something about the city because we worked on this special project. But I go back to what I said before. If you believe, that you want us to expand to 3 or 4, that it's your call. We'll have to somehow manage and administer that as best we can. But if you're going to do that, then I really don't think that 100, how much we have in the fund, 150, is going to be enough. 165. Yeah, I have to.
Let's do this. Let's expand it to 4, and and then if you find the funding, you come back to us and tell us what the funding increase, but manage the 4, and that'd be the top 4, where we'd include at least 2 companies that are women or minority owned, and at least 1 headquartered in the city of LA. And of the 4, 3 are local businesses.
Okay. You want us? How would you the recommendation gives, so you want to leave the recommendation alone and just leave it up to the CEO's office to divide up the work, correct?
Well, the thing is this, is that our recommendation from the committee will be that, and we'd amend the CAO report to include the top 4 companies as opposed to the top 2. And that we'd ask the CAO to come back if there's an issue in the future as far as funding.
Okay. I want to make it, we like all 6 firms. We like the 4 firms. Mm-hmm. That we tend to work with everyone as best we can. So this is not an issue of who you like better or who we think is doing better. It was truly an issue of, who scored the highest.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, the reason I have a concern is that in my idle time, I read.
You have idle time?
Yeah, idle time. I read the New York Times, and I read the Washington Post, and I read the Detroit Free Press, and I read the LA Times, and they all have a different view of the economic situation in the world.
You're correct.
And so if these people have a different perspective, they might be helpful to us.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And this is just, it's a classic example of reasoning used why we haven't been able to tap into minority and women, whether it's admissions to colleges, et cetera. And,
I hear you.
We had a great opportunity to expand the pool, which is really what we need to do. We expand the pie, and we would achieve our goal and not come up with traditional excuses why we can't. And I think here we're doing the right thing by doing that.
I totally understand that.
Okay. So that's Wednesday?
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we'll move that with that amendment, and it will be on the council agenda for Wednesday.
Item number 9 on the agenda, CLA reports relative to a donation from the LA Police Foundation for the Hydra Minerva Training Suite valued at $370,000.
Let me just ask one thing. Lorraine, on number 8, could you just add one phrase in there when we talk about that motion that deals with major programs or laws, that we also add the word major policy changes? Phrase. Okay, then we go to 9. You were sitting there this morning.
Yes, sir, I'm back.
I think this came through public safety, and the only concern I still have is because of the sensitivity of emergency preparedness and the limited funds, that I don't believe that's, even though it's not worded that you can't use it, I don't know if that's the most appropriate use of the money, particularly when they only end up with a couple $100,000 for 12 months. That, do we have the ability in the sense of looking within the department's equipment fund or something in that regard that would pay for this, as opposed to going over and taking it from another department?
Well, given the fact that the department, I think, is $120 million in the hole.
But not not their equipment account.
Well, I think they're viewing their budget as a whole. And if they have shortfalls in other accounts, then they do make transfers from the equipment account. We did ask them about the possibility of the Police Foundation providing an additional donation for the build-outs. We were told that the foundation has a policy of not providing donations for capital improvements. We also inquired about the possibility of grant funds. No grant funds are available for this purpose. We also looked into the possibility of Prop 2 funds. However, that funding is earmarked for a new location for SID. As we indicated in the original report, if the build-outs are not possible, then the donation cannot be received, because the configuration of the rooms is critical to the unique structure of the training methodology. The other alternative that we were seeking, that we would request a report back from the police department as well as our office and the CAO, is the issue of possible offsets with respect to providing this training to other public agencies. We explored that possibility with the deputy chief over IMTV. What the deputy chief had indicated was that the possibility for the reimbursement for this training to other public agencies is probably in the distant future, because the focus will be on training internal city staff. However, that did lead to a much broader discussion with respect to the number of classes that they are offering to other public agencies and for which they don't obtain reimbursement. So we would like the opportunity to report back on that issue, because we think there are opportunities there. Apparently, the Sheriff's Department does seek reimbursements from other public agencies, and that's something that we think should be explored.
Okay. The issue is, again, as we discussed this morning, this is purchase of equipment that they're donating as opposed to funds to the department.
Correct. And I think, just to make it totally clear, the foundation has a policy of not providing cash donations to the city. All of their donations are in the form of equipment.
Okay. So the issue is, and then also, is it the recommendation of the CLA that we are accepting this equipment and will be in the future replacing it when it breaks or
Yes,
it's outdated?
Yes, and we will in the future include that information in our reports.
Okay. So then, if I understand it, then, again, so I can sleep at night, if we can just not take the money from emergency preparedness, get a report back as you survey the world and within how they might address this shortfall within their department, whether they get it funded or charge other people, that we get that as a report back, but that we not move the money from emergency preparedness at this time. Can we get that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then if we could look at, and again, with a $1-point-something billion budget, I would hope they could find $68,000.
We will ask again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we will approve the CLA's report, but we will concur with the public safety report, and with one, we ask in that report that you seek other resources, and we will basically support that continued effort to look at other resources within LAPD's budget. So we'll concur with the public safety report.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand how this is going to progress.
Okay.
And the issue the reason I'm concerned about it is because if we cannot find funding for the build-outs, then we really can't accept the donation. So does that mean that the donation...
Come back and tell us that you've surveyed the world, and out of $1-point-something billion budget, we can't find $68,000.
Okay.
And we'd be glad to
We will
listen to
report
that.
back.
I just think you can do it. Thank you. So we'll endorse the Public Safety Committee report asking that an alternative funding source within the department be located, and that we not take the money from emergency preparedness. So we'll move that item.
Item number 10 on the special agenda, a CLA report relative to a revised special events fee study policy ordinance.
Good afternoon. I'm Lynn
Good
O'Fallon.
afternoon.
This report is a follow-up to council's discussions of June 9th and 16th, 2009, when they considered a special events fee policy, fee subsidy ordinance. At that time, there were three major concerns that the council wanted your committee to report back on. They are the council district review of proposed events and input on measures to mitigate negative community impact be considered, the ability of event organizer to know in advance the city permit fees and costs for a specific event and to be reimbursed if actual costs are less, and the ability to provide a fee subsidy of less than 50% to enable additional deserving special events to receive assistance within limited funding. What we've done is the city attorney and my office have had numerous discussions on ways that we could address these concerns that the council had.
Let me just ask one thing. It seems like one that seemed to have gotten a lot of attention, but you didn't cover, was the insistence that the council members wanted to have the final say on the use of the office fund. And Pete was telling us you can't have that discretion, and if we've not resolved that, then going back, it's just like we're going to be in another circle here in a little bit. So did we resolve that issue?
Yes.
Okay. How did we resolve that?
The way that we've resolved that is the subsidy funds are going to be administered in the same manner that council district community events that are part of the GCP currently.
Okay.
They're going to be administered in the very same manner.
So then we do have the discretion.
Yes, you do.
Okay. And so Pete, is the legal part that we were talking about before, does that dissolve itself?
I think it reduces the risk of legal challenge that I saw before in two ways. The permit would be issued and the payment for the full amount of the fees would be required from the permittee. And there's no waiver or subsidy when they come in and actually get that permit after the
So they have to
process of
pay up front.
application. They have to pay.
Well, they
The-
have to pay, I'm sorry, not when they submit their application, but when they pick up the
The
permit.
permit. Right,
Okay,
when
so
the
they
permit
pay
is
in
issued.
full, and then the council office decides whether they're going to subsidize it at a later time?
At any point in time. They may provide a subsidy in advance, and through the GCP process that is utilized for other support to community organizations. Similarly, the council offices can provide support to these organizations for the special events.
Okay.
And so it would be, again, within that $5,000 limitation. Above $5,000, that would take a full council action to approve the expenditure. That applies to all GCP.
But then we're getting that workload back in the council that we're trying.
If the amount is over $5,000. Now, that would all nevertheless be subject to a 50% limitation per event, per sponsor, twice a year. So 2 events per sponsor per year, as we had in the policy before. It would be subject to no subsidy being provided unless there was money in that fund at the time for that council district. So the limitations would all still be in place. It's just that the council office is more involved in making that initial determination to provide funding for particular organizations.
As you spoke before, can the council office still look at the fund and place limitations on percentage of the money being spent during a certain part of the year? If the bulk of their events are,
The council office would determine, as they do now for other GCP awards, if you will, that are made to organizations, they would determine which organizations and how much, up to the limitation the council is placing overall on all its
over
members.
5,000, it has to come to council.
And it can be no more than 50% of the cost for the event.
No more than- Okay, so then when a person comes into the one-shop center and they have one of these, it's not a citywide, but it comes in for this 50%, the council office gets notified. They can make a decision at that time whether they front the 50% or whether they allow the vendor or the community person to pay the full amount and reimburse them later once you find out the actual cost.
There's actually no fronting. I mean, the timing of the council office interface with the sponsor for the event can occur at any point in time. So the two are actually separated. That when the sponsor comes in and actually gets the permit, not files the application, but gets the permit, that's when the payment would be due from them. Whether they had the funding already from the council office in anticipation of that, or whether they go back and get a reimbursement, having paid it, with an understanding that the council office would reimburse it, is up to the council office.
Okay, so then the other issue is on farmers markets. They're now within the discretion of the council office, and there can be waived at 100%,
Up to 100%.
or subsidized at 100%.
Up to
Up to
100.
100%.
It could be less, that the council person determines.
Now, the other issue was is that somewhere in this ordinance, the $5 million operating budget part fell out that we were using as a guide for convention center and for developmental fees. And so I'm wondering, because I think there was some interpretation you had to have $5 million, and we're saying, no, you have an operating budget of less than $5 million to be considered for a subsidy.
And I have to say, there may be some confusion on my part, but although that was part of the development fee subsidy program, I never understood it to be part of this program, at least not at the point in which I became involved with this ordinance, which was about 2 or 3 years
We were
ago.
trying to keep a standard. We had it for development fees. I think we did it for, Lynn, did we do it for convention center
Yeah.
subsidy?
We did.
And we're looking
Right.
at it for the leasing of city property. We're using kind of the same standard. And so it wasn't that they had to have $5 million. It was that if they are at a general fund in excess of $5 million.
An operating budget? Yeah.
That they wouldn't be eligible for subsidy as related to these events. And somewhere that fell out or something.
Well, again, it may have just not been applied here, but it was not part of it, at least at the time that I've been involved with it, the last 2 or 3 years. It can be made part of it, That would be a direction that you would have, you would need to give us.
As a standard that we've used, that we can stay with that standard, so it's consistent as we talk about subsidies. It's a part of the whole subsidy area as relates to our financial policies.
It can be. It will, and I need to point out, it would impact a number of the special events that do receive some type of assistance from the city now, that are major events by major organizations, such as maybe some of the universities around here.
Well, the thing is, we've already, and again, talked to our university and said, that basically, we thought we were on the same line with the $5 million and said, there's little of anything that you would be getting subsidized for, and that we recommended to them that their own police department would be doing the bulk of this work, as opposed to them relying on the city, unless they're asking us to close down the street or something.
Right.
So we've had that discussion with them already about what we thought the direction was going in. And their relationship with the Coliseum, they'd have to negotiate that as related to the cost of outside resources like game day and things of that nature.
Right.
So, but again, it was kind of being consistent, because there was always a concern that some of the wealthy nonprofits were getting waivers when maybe they did not warrant it, or that they had the wherewithal to pay it. And that was one of the reasons that the $5 million was kind of plugged in there, to make sure that we're talking about subsidizing smaller nonprofits as opposed to mega nonprofits.
I think take everyone a while to figure this out. It's a lot of little details about where you apply, where you don't apply, who subsidizes what. And secondly, I think we're going to run out of money quick for the citywide events, and some council districts which have more special events are going to run out of funding quicker than others. So it would be interesting to see how this works out. On the citywide events, if we subsidize them 50%, the other 50%, if it's a nonprofit, how do they get subsidized? How do they make up that 50%? The nonprofit would have to put in that 50%?
Yes.
Okay. And if a special event applies to the clerk or the Bureau of Street Services, wherever it is, they get input from the council office. The council office says, we don't feel comfortable giving the permit here because we've had an experience with them where they don't do their deal of the bargain. They move the barriers, they don't clean up after themselves. We just don't think this event should go. I mean, how much leeway or input is the council office really going to have with the clerk or the Bureau of Street Services?
Bureau of Street Services would transmit the application for the permit to all departments that are affected and to the council office, asking for them to review the application and provide comments as to conditions that need to be placed on the permit, or reasons for denial as well.
So if the council office feels strongly that we should deny a particular one, I mean, that's something that the Bureau of Street Services will take seriously, correct?
I would imagine that they would take that seriously. There may be instances in which they'll just deny, and there may be instances where they'll ask our office if there's sufficient legal grounds to deny. But there would need to be...
Moving barriers and not picking up after yourself in the last couple of events, is that sufficient legal grounds?
It would depend on the event and what had transpired. And also on the comments that were received from the various departments that were involved in effect, cleaning up after the event, if you will.
Okay. What if an event comes up during the year? We establish this list once a year, the citywide event list. We will establish it once a year. We come up with a new list every year, correct?
The expectation was, and unfortunately for 09-10, it didn't work out this way, but it was expected that during the budget process, when the citywide pot is determined, it would also have included a list of citywide events. But this year, it didn't happen during the budget, but it's happening now. But yes, it would recur once a year.
So it will recur once a year. Will it go with the budget process, or will there be a separate process?
That was my expectation, because the subsidy funds are part of the general fund budget.
So as we prepare the 10-11 budget, we will have a difficult choice to make whether we keep within the 1 million or we go up to, right now the list for 910 is 2.2 million, correct?
I'm sorry, for 0910,
Yeah.
it's 2.5, 1.5 for council districts,
Okay.
and then $1 million.
So we're in the 1 million for the citywide?
Yes.
Okay, we are within the 1 million, okay. And on farmers markets, we're saying that farmers markets would not be part of the citywide events, but what if a farmers market does attract 3 or more council districts? Under the definition of citywide events, it would qualify.
That would be up to the council to determine,
So we could put farmers markets on the list that we feel are citywide events.
if the council as a body approves it.
Okay, but not all farmers markets will qualify by
Right.
definition. Okay, so if we feel there's a farmers market that definitely has an impact to 3 or more council districts, we could ask to have it put on the list.
But being on the citywide list, they would also fall under the 50% cap.
The 50% cap of subsidy.
Yes.
Okay. But if they're not on the list, they would have to come up with the full funding.
Right.
Yeah.
In your
Right.
district,
In the district.
up to 100%.
Okay, okay. What if an event comes up mid-year and we recognize it's a citywide event? What's the process to get it funded as a citywide event?
My expectation would be that a member could introduce a motion, and if you get the majority of votes, then it could be added to the list.
But what if the $1 million is already accounted for that year?
Then there would be no more subsidies.
There would be
If there's
more
no money, there's no subsidy.
There's no money, so we can't add, because the reason they would want to be added for the citywide is to get the 50% subsidy.
Correct. I mean, theoretically, you could find money someplace else and have it transferred to that account, and then add an additional event.
So for something
That's
to
what it
be
would take.
considered and get subsidized as a citywide event, the best deal for them would be to do it during the budget process. If an event comes up during the year, we say, tough luck, sorry, you didn't come in the beginning of the process.
Right.
Well, and the other point I wanted to emphasize about this is that right now, we only know what the estimated costs are.
Yeah.
I think after we've been through this for a year, we'll have a better idea of what the actual costs are. Some events may be less expensive, some may be a little more. So if you did have a mid-year addition, it's possible that there could be some funds that are left that you could use to fund it. But after a year, I think we would have a better sense of what the actual costs are.
Okay. There were some events here that we saw that probably shouldn't be citywide events. What's the process for us to recommend that they be taken off the list? Do we amend it here in committee?
You
Is
could
that
do
the
it
best
right
way?
now.
Okay. And there are other events we thought should be citywide events. Should we amend it right here as well? Okay.
Let me ask you, now, this came from lists from council offices?
These lists were submitted from council offices. Staff reviewed them. I spoke with various council offices about ones that I'd recommend they take off. In some cases, council staff agreed and we took them off. In other cases, they said, no, it's really a citywide event.
And the
So,
criteria
I
you
left
used for
them off.
citywide was what, 3 council offices?
3 council offices, thousands of attendees, and to the extent possible that it could be unique. In other words, it might be the only one in the city, or the only type of an event of that type.
Or, not and.
Or, yeah.
Okay. We could add, I see a number of 4th of July events here, fireworks shows. There's a number of them throughout the city, and there's 2 that occur in Council District 14 that each one draws about 4,000 people each. One is the El Sereno, the other is the Boyle Heights, July 4th fireworks shows. We could add those. And there's also a Northeast Veterans Day Parade had-
one's been added.
That one was
Your
added?
staff suggested I add that, and I,
Okay, that one's been added, okay.
Well, you know, one thing that would be helpful, do we have any way to array this attachment by council district? Because it just
yes, I
it
could.
crosses your eyes trying to find your district.
I could.
All right, and then let me just ask a question on CD 12. Was there 4th of July spectacular added?
Yes, Shepherd of the Hills, I believe.
Shepherd of the Hills? And then also, just so that everyone's clear, if a council motion came forward in the past and designated something as a full recovery or full waiver, this proposal will not unravel any prior council action. Is that right?
Yes, if you've already adopted a motion for an upcoming event,
Yeah.
then this is not going to unravel that.
Okay. But our moratorium goes to August 31st.
That's true.
And also, there's a Boyle Heights Mariachi Festival, we could add that as well, and look at the criteria, we could send the criteria over how that qualifies for citywide events.
I apologize, I have a revised list that the city clerk will be handing out to you. So,
Okay.
yes, that one was added
That
on
was added, okay.
at the last minute.
And also, for commercial events, there's a number of commercial events throughout the city that will no longer qualify for subsidy. We currently subsidize some of these commercial events. And the explanation to them now is, you know, in the past, we've subsidized you. If it's not run by a nonprofit, you no longer will qualify from any subsidy, and you will have to pay 100%. Is that correct?
That's true.
That's true. Now, the Academy Awards, is that private or is that a nonprofit?
That's run through the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which is a nonprofit organization.
Do they realize a profit at all through? They realize a profit, but it's a nonprofit, so so they do.
I have not ever reviewed their books, but in order to be a nonprofit, they have to meet certain standards of the Internal Revenue Service.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just wondering because there's some other. If the issue is people are making a profit from these events, whether you are listed as a private or nonprofit, we are still subsidizing them, whether it's profit or nonprofit, and they're realizing a profit out of this. So I'm not sure if that's a correct definition to use. I mean,
Actually,
it's
the
more
definition-
about the stated purpose of the event, right? What is it that the city gets out of providing a public event for Angelenos? That's more of what we want to get at, not whether it's a nonprofit or not.
The definition the drafts have used up to now is whether it's a commercial or non-commercial event.
Commercial or non-commercial, that's the
Correct.
definition we use.
And
now.
by definition, the non-commercial event would be one that if a city department puts it on and is the sponsor, obviously that's a governmental purpose and non-commercial. If a nonprofit 501c3 puts it on and none of the proceeds, whether there are net proceeds or not, but if there are net proceeds, none of the proceeds go to benefit any private individual,
Okay.
that's deemed to be a non-commercial event.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you going to give us this by council district?
Yes, I will.
Okay, I think it'd be
Promise.
easier when we get to council. And I think, hopefully, after, 7 years, that we'll get this, when is this scheduled for council?
I believe it's
Friday.
scheduled for Friday.
Friday.
I believe you'll need an ordinance by Friday.
Okay,
We'll do our best to get it there.
okay. And then we have one recommended change?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to read into the record. In lieu of the recommendation 1C, the corrected recommendation should read, BOSS will consider public safety and welfare issues and input from departments and affected council offices. BOSS may issue permits for requested special event and include conditions required by council offices and departments to maintain public safety and welfare of the community and the city. So, Peter, if you get that done for us for Friday, then
the issue is, it's another one of those, we got to get it twice at 10 votes as opposed to 12, because there's
Well,
not,
I'm sorry, it's 8 votes, it's 10 members present, but it's
so we only
8
need
to
8.
adopt. 8 to adopt, but you have to have 10 present.
Okay. So, I mean, is that, but that's not, we got to do it twice, though.
Yes,
That's not
two
on the
readings.
first reading.
2 readings.
So if we get that for Friday, it'd be helpful to get this 7 years behind us. And then we can move on to nonprofit renting.
Getting the ordinance to you may be within my control, getting you 12 members on Friday isn't.
What's this? Mhm. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. And we're going to, okay. Okay.
You mean-
And one other thing on the report, my understanding is that your recommendation number 5, Personnel Committee would like to hear that regarding the city clerk's position. So we make that recommendation that it go to the Personnel Committee.
Thank you.
And then we have your change for item 1C. Okay. All right, any other questions? We have no comment cards. And so we'll move that item to the council for Friday's agenda. So the last 2 items we have is closed session.
Yes.
So we can just sit here and ask everyone that's not here for closed session for items 1 and 2, that we'd ask you to leave, and then we will ask the city attorney's office to come up and deal with items 1 and 2.
All right, we're back.
I'm Marilyn Garcia, Assistant City Attorney, and I reported on item 4 that was considered by your committee earlier in the afternoon. And a matter has come to my attention, and I would like to request that 2 words be added to the text of Section 3, so that the last sentence in Section 3 would now read, "Any stipulated settlements," and the 2 added words, "or judgments conforming to the requirements of this paragraph and approved by council prior to the effective date of the ordinance, adding this paragraph to the Los Angeles Administrative Code, may be paid from the proceeds of judgment obligation bonds."
Okay, we'll move that as an amendment for number 4.
That will
And
be,
that's, again, Friday.
yes, that will be part of the council document. Number 4 is one for Wednesday.
For Wednesday. Okay, that's Wednesday. Okay. We have no public comment cards. We have no more items on the agenda, so we will adjourn. Thank you.
Have a good recess.